Welcome to the Children in Scotland podcast. I'm Gemma, and I'm part of the communications team here at Children in Scotland. This year, we decided to trial a brand new podcast, and our 2019 annual conference seemed like the perfect opportunity to do this. So here it is. This is the first episode, and in this episode, you're going to hear from Simon Massey, our Head of Engagement and Learning, and Jimmy Paul, who is among many things the co-chair of the Workforce Work Group at the Independent Care Review. Simon and Jimmy are going to share a bit about their experience of the Independent Care Review and give you some insights into what's coming next. We hope you enjoy listening.
Hi, I'm Jimmy, and I am a co-chair on the Workforce Workstream at the Independent Care Review.
I'm Simon Massey. I'm the Head of Engagement and Learning at Children in Scotland, and I'm part of the aforementioned Workforce group on the Independent Care Review. Do you want to say a bit, Jimmy, about how you came to be involved in the Independent Care Review?
Absolutely. So I met Fiona Duncan, who's the chair of the review, at it was a charity event, and before I had any time to rack up any courage, she had arrived in my face and said, "Hi, I know who you are, can we chat?" So my first involvement in the review was at the discovery phase, and I formed part of the go-to groups, which is new voices, new people who sense check the work of the previous phase. And then I was asked to be a co-chair on the review. I'm happy to share that I have lived experience of care. How about you?
I was asked to be part of the workforce group, and part of that was I'm a social worker by training, so I've got quite a lot of experience in that field, but I did 7 years in residential childcare from the age of 19. I was quite young when I started, and then a lot of other field social work and therapeutic social work, and it was felt that was quite helpful. And then I also have some personal experience with family members being adopted, so I was really keen to get involved, and I've got to say it has definitely been my favourite piece of work over the last year. Being involved in it and the stuff we've done has been one of my favourite bits of work. If you were going to sum up in like 30 seconds what the Independent Care Review is or is hoping to achieve, what would you say?
Okay, don't time me, because I'm going to go over, no doubt. So it is, the Independent Care Review is a root and branch review of the care system in Scotland, seeking to make sure that Scotland is the best place for all children in the world to grow up in the world. And this really is wider than just care. It is right back in communities and families. And in terms of my role, so the review started, I mentioned discovery earlier. There are 4 different phases. There was orientation back in February 2017, the setting up of the review and the secretariat. There was discovery, which was looking at what we call the roots and branches. What is our scope? So that was wide, not deep. There's journey, the phase we're in just now, and the phase you and I have been working on together, Simon, which is deep dives into the 10 emerging work groups and themes, and the synthesizing of those to make sure that the conclusions marry up. And then there's destination, which will take place in from January to March, which will be the end of the care review, and the handing over of work recommendations back to Scotland. And there's a real opportunity for Scotland there. So specific to my role, I lead a group of people, the Workforce Workstream, alongside my co-chair Sue Brooks. They have a range of experiences, lived and professional experiences, all across Scotland, and we've collectively done a deep dive into the issues that affect the workforce. And I'm quite picky about mentioning this too. It's the workforce really is the paid and unpaid. It's carers, it's volunteers. So people aren't always comfortable with that word, but essentially it's about the people.
I think you touched on what was one of the challenges for us as a group was that definition and terminology in lots of different ways, but I guess what do we mean by workforce? And I was thinking back to what some of the other challenges are or have been from my point of view, and I think one of the things that we struggled with was to maintain that ambition of having a sort of 50% of the cohort or people involved to have lived experience, and I think you and Sue worked very hard at managing that, but it was a challenge, and I was kind of wondering how that was across the rest of the care review. And
it was a challenge. It was one of many challenges we've faced, and the sense I get is that being often in a room, a formal meeting space, is not what people with lived experience want, because it might remind us of horrible meetings we've had or difficult times we've had, and more fun, creative spaces. So we tried to build that into our work. We made sure we were as colourful and creative as possible. But in terms of maintaining that membership, some of the other work groups struggled with that too. For those listening, the intention is always for those with lived experience to be involved at every level, at every stage of the review, extensively, in a way that hasn't been the case before. And so by setting that 50%, that was the intention. Some work groups achieved that, some didn't, but that was in terms of formal attendance at meetings. Yes, there are a number of people with lived experience in the group who didn't turn up routinely to meetings, but we were sure to hear them in one-to-one meetings, over coffee or over dinner and things like that, in ways that suited people. Whatever worked for people worked for us, and we were sure to live by that, and we continue to in our work.
And I say that's a key learning from, isn't it, that actually can be replicated across lots of different things, because a meeting will work for some people, as in a physical meeting of lots of people coming together, will work for some people but not for everyone. So that's kind of, I think, real credit to you and Sue, but also to the care review around how to engage with people.
Absolutely. I think the phrase that really bugs me is hard to reach. People are hard to reach because they won't engage with how we run something or do something, or a pre-existing way of meeting people, and that's just wrong. No one is hard to reach. If that is our role and remit, then we need to try harder and do different things.
One of the things I'm conscious of is Fiona wrote one of our 25 calls. So we did the campaign which started in 2018 around 25 calls, and Fiona wrote one about the care review, what it was hoping to achieve. I guess, do you think you as the one of the people heavily involved in it, are on a course to sort of meet some of those objectives and aims?
I read Fiona's article. I think that was before I was directly involved in the review, and I remember thinking, this is crucial and this is important, and I'm glad children in Scotland are having these 25 calls. So do I think we're on course for this? 100% think we are. And something we were talking about just the other day, Simon, in terms of modelling the model, that has been quite important, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Modelling the model. So Fiona Duncan and all of us as co-chairs often say that we are accountable to those with lived experience, and also increasingly through the workforce group we say the workforce, or the people around children, young people, infants in care, matter as well. And so that accountability to those rather than to someone else is really crucial. So that's the first thing. And the second is the level and quality of participation. And actually I know the Children in Scotland participation guidance has been really central in the work of the review and how we've done participation. So that's the second thing I wanted to allude to. So modelling the model in terms of accountability and the quality of participation and lived and professional experience working together at every level, I think that's built on momentum for change, and I think that will continue long beyond the review when it concludes. So we have that momentum for change, and the challenge I would like to put out to anyone listening to this and across Scotland is that the desire is there and we need to embrace that opportunity. So a lot of the work is done, yes, but we now need to grasp that and do something with it.
I think one of the things that has really stuck out for me is, and it's one of the challenges, so I don't want to focus too much on the challenges, but I guess it's the learning that comes out of it as well. Of a lot of the things we talked about that would make a difference on those young people and families who are involved in the care system in whatever way, actually are much bigger than that. So we were talking about early intervention, we talked about poverty, we talked about mental health services, and that how having an early intervention, an effective early intervention approach, will have an impact on the number of children and young people who end up in the care system. And I think that's going to be one of the real challenges about the recommendations, the conclusions we're making as the workforce group, but then the recommendations that the independent care review will make. And I don't think there's an answer to this really. It's just an observation that actually, we talked about poverty, and it'd be very difficult for the independent care review to make a specific recommendation on that, but it is that that broader societal thing we need to be thinking about, and how we work together and how we shift. I know one of the groups is around stigma, and it's how we kind of focus on that and shift that stigma away, and lots of other related issues.
I think that is a challenge, but this review isn't here to tinker. It is here to make Scotland by far the best place for all children to grow up. You mentioned early intervention. That's crucial as well. We have increasingly spaces for things like champions boards and young people being asked to speak and share and things like that, and that is great, and I don't think we do enough of that actually. But we also have a group of people that make up a large chunk of the looked after population, and they're under fives, and who is working with and championing their views and what's important to them as well. So there's lots more that we need to do around that, and we won't tinker. We will talk about universal services, we will talk about addressing things like poverty, but not conflating poverty with neglect. You know, we get the nuance around that as well, but you're spot on, and it might be difficult to address, but the review will be brave enough to make those recommendations.
What are the next steps then for the review? What's the kind of remaining timeline for it, as it were?
So at time of recording, which is November, we have a couple of months left with the work groups to continue our deep dives, to synthesise those. And what will happen is the groups will then put conclusions to Fiona Duncan, the chair of the review, who will then agree and turn those into recommendations. They will be packaged in a way that is easily understandable to children, young people, adults with care experience, and the workforce. At the end, there will be a report, so at the end being kind of somewhere between January and March, a report will come out, and we'll build that momentum for implementation and change as the review concludes in March. So that will happen from now, which is November, to December, with the go-to groups and the conclusions and the recommendations, and the plans for releasing the report on information and building the momentum for change will happen from January to March.
And I think one of the other things I've been very impressed with the Independent Care Review is the information that's out there, which I guess if people have been following any of it, they will know this, but for people who don't know, there is the Independent Care Review website, which gives a lot of information about those different parts of the care review. If people are interested in it, I would, I'd strongly recommend having a look at the website, because it is kept up to date. It's easy to read. Stuff's written in nice kind of plain language, isn't it? Which is, I think, really helpful.
It is helpful, it's crucial, and the whole design as well, early on, so in the first phase of the review, orientation, there was a co-design workshop run by facilitators, those at the care review, and people with lived experience of care of different ages, and that's where the design, the colours, the shapes, and the focus on clean language comes from, and so that's been really crucial.
Jimmy, I'm wondering whether people might be interested in knowing a bit more the detail of what we've ended up focusing on, because we obviously, as you said, it kind of came as this kind of very broad range of people, and there was a bit of a challenge of what do we focus on. So I wonder if you want to say a little bit more around what we ended up identifying.
Absolutely. So I'll talk to the 9 work packages and I'll run through them. I'll keep it brief. But these are the work packages that the group agreed on. And there are 2 underpinning work packages. The first is values. So what are the values of the workforce or the people around children? What are the values of Scotland in relation to our children? And that needs to underpin everything. It needs to underpin recruitment. It needs to underpin evaluation of services. It needs to underpin coaching, mentoring and supervision of people in the different roles they're in. And the second, which will chime with you, is participation and engagement. So making sure that infants, children, young people have a voice and a say in their own care journeys, and we do that in creative ways that are important and relevant to them, but also as a society. So how are we learning from lived experience rather than just from statistics, for example? And there's another level of that as well, which is how are we hearing from the workforce or the people around children? What is their participation? One of the things we've found so amazing in the workforce work group is having such a diverse group coming together and understanding each other a lot more. And how can we do more of that? So those are our two underpinning themes that we feel will drive significant change for the workforce. The third is identity. So this is multifaceted, multi-layered. How do we make sure that a child who is looked after in any form of care has a real, that their identity is prioritised and they're allowed to grow and develop a sense of identity that's important to them. So the intersectional thing comes into play here, the focus on their sexuality, where they're from, their skin colour, their culture and their heritage, whether they have a disability, things like that, all of those things. And I maybe shouldn't have started naming things because I didn't want to forget other things, but this is really about what it means to be a child in the family you're in, and it's also about you in your wider community and making sure that there is a plan that fits not just around you as a child, but maybe your brothers and sisters, maybe your whole family located in community as well. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. Yeah.
Good. Okay. The fourth is what we're calling, some of the language is clunky, but we're calling it family models of care. So we've heard some really good examples with really amazing statistics around different models that work really well, like the Mockingbird model of fostering, or step up, step down. Some things that residential care have done really well too. And we will never put a model on a pedestal, but we do want to understand the key principles and themes that make that really effective. So I'll use the example of Mockingbird, where there is a hub family and there's a community of foster carers, maybe kinship carers, maybe parents who look after their children at home on a CSO, and they're part of this named group in a community. And there is peer support, there's support at times of crisis, there's mentoring support from a specialist, if you like, in a hub family, and people have the skills to meet the needs of their children. So in saying we don't focus on putting Mockingbird on a pedestal, for example, but we do the peer support, the right skills, the right people at the right time is really important. And so we've unpicked some things there. Removing barriers to excellent care is the next one. So we hear from people in a range of care environments, foster care, kinship, residential, secure, otherwise, that there are barriers to providing excellent care. Sometimes a social worker might not feel they're able to spend time building a relationship with a child because it's taking away from their office work or recording of paperwork. We hear that sometimes it's really hard to take children away from the home and completing different checks to have sleepovers and things like that. So what are the things, and this ties in closely with stigma, so how do we normalise care and don't overplay the risks that are associated with that, and what do the workforce need to be enabled to do that? And that leads in nicely to the sixth work package, which is being less risk averse. And how do we reframe risk averseness to protective factors? How do we focus and accept that yes, the state is looking after a child in whatever way it is, but make sure they're not deprived of opportunities to grow and learn through managed exposure to risk, maybe you'll call it. Maybe that's clunky language, but all children experience risk. Going to the park, in the playground, there are risks associated with that, but do we separate those with lived experience of care doing the same things, and why, and understanding what the protective factors are and focusing on those and building those. The seventh one is right person at the right time. So making sure that services are designed around families and children, not around services. So, for example, why almost every children's hearing take place between 9 to 5 during the day, office hours, when lots of children will then be taken out of school to go to those hearings. What's that about? Why are services typically 9 to 5 when we know family breakdowns and issues happen in evenings and weekends? So how do we make sure services are aligned around the needs of children and families? So we'll be talking about some of those as we make conclusions. The eighth is what we're calling the learning pathway. Being really sensitive with this, because lots of people with lived experience have said, I don't need someone with a degree to look after me. I need someone who loves me and can build a relationship with me and sustain that. At the same time, the people in our group, especially those with lived experience, understand as part of our process of growing as a group that people still need the right skills and knowledge, things like brain development, things like trauma-informed working and trauma-responsive working, making sure that we can diffuse situations and we understand behaviour as communication. And some of these skills can be taught, and therefore education institutions need to step up to the plate in terms of how that teaching is delivered. And how do we do that? So that's the learning pathway. And also, how do we... John Carnacan, one of the co-chairs, often says, how can we love our children if we barely like them? So as part of the learning pathway, we might do something about parenting awareness, awareness of brain development and infant development. And we might do that all the way back in schools, so that anyone who becomes a parent has some of this basic knowledge. We might do some sort of awareness campaign around that too. And the last one, and maybe this is even a highlight theme from all of our work, is that we need to nurture the people around children so that they can nurture. Those people need to feel loved. They need to feel that their hands are being held just as they're holding children's hands. And if we can do that, then children will be surrounded by people who are modelling the behaviours that they're being asked to model in terms of Shinari and Gerfek and all of that. So how do we build that congruence? By really valuing our staff so that they can then value children.
So before we wrap up, I guess, is there anything else you would want to sort of say as the favourite part or the key bit of learning you haven't mentioned already?
I can talk about both of those things. I can talk about this all day. To be honest, it's been such a joy, and you mentioned it's been one of the favourite things you've done in the past year. It's definitely the highlight, I think, of my professional career. So the most surprising thing to come out of the review, I think, is people's willingness to change, and people across Scotland who have said, you know what, I'm really glad this review is happening and it's challenging me and us because we could do things better. And I think that involves a high level of emotional intelligence, of reflectiveness, of being a kind of early adapter for change. And those things are going to be vital in that building of momentum. So I wanted to commend that as something that's been positively surprising. But I'm keen to hear about your favourite moment.
I think I already mentioned the sort of developing different relationships with people, which has been really positive from my point of view. I think one of my favourite things when I look back on it is actually the shared belief and understanding of the importance of values in stuff. I come from a social work background. I did a lot of, I was a social worker for years. I did a lot in social work education as well, so I've assessed people around values and etc, etc. And so sometimes people will roll their eyes a little bit and it's, that's a bit social working. So, but actually what is apparent through our work at the Independent Care Review, and then recently I was at a care inspector at Quality Conversations session, and again we were talking about values there, and it's this, it seems to be really well understood and rolling out, and I think that how we move things forward and get things right is by having this shared understanding of values. We talk on the Independent Care Review about the importance of getting the right people to do the job, in inverted commas. And one of those things is that those people come with the right values, and we know what those values are. And I just think meeting such a wide range of people who seem to have that understanding has just been really heartening and a really positive experience. Yeah. So I think I would say that's probably one of my favourite parts of it. Not a one-off moment, but more of a gradual, as the group's formed and we've got to know each other.
Yes, how nice.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jimmy. That's been good talking to you.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure. Cheers for having me. And yes, looking forward to see what's next for children in Scotland.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Children in Scotland podcast. For any more information about anything that we do, go to www.childreninscotland.org.uk. And for any more information about the Independent Care Review, you can head over to carereview.scot.